Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you again. We're really excited to have everyone here, as well as to have our moderator, Dr. Robert Jagers, as well as Dr. Thomas Kane from Harvard, Dr. Sharon Contreras from Guilford County Schools, and Superintendent Cade Brumley from Louisiana. I'm just going to give a few quick logistical housekeeping notes, and then I will turn it over to our president and CEO, Dr. Javed Siddiqui. We would love to have you join us on social media, join into the conversation. So if you are interested in doing that and following along on social media, please use the hashtag @Homeroom. As I mentioned before, if you are just joining us, we won't be unmuting lines for attendees, just since there are quite a few of you here. So please, if you have any questions, submit them into the chat, and we will answer as many as we can and make sure that if there's any technical glitches or anything like that, that we're able to help you out. We're going to hear from our panelists for about 15 to 20 minutes for opening remarks, and then we'll jump into a Q&A. So please have those questions ready to go, submitted into the Q&A, and we will start asking them as soon as we're done with opening remarks. We'll have lots of time devoted to that, and we want to make sure we get through as many as possible. So feel free to submit as many as you can. If we aren't able to get to your question, we hopefully will have some follow-up on that in the next week or so. But we are really excited to hear your thoughts and anything else that you might want to add. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the Hunt Institute's president and CEO, Dr. Javed Siddiqui, who's just going to start us off with some quick opening remarks.
Thanks, Julia. Thanks for all your work on getting this set up. And thanks to everybody for joining us this morning. As we all know, this year, our teachers, our school leaders have stepped up to serve students in ways we would never have previously imagined. Today, our panelists will be addressing how states, districts, and their partners can collaborate to collect and synthesize the incredible work educators have been doing to support students, what solutions have been effective around the country for using data-driven, evidence-based strategies for supporting the whole child. It's very clear that even once things return to what was previously considered normal, things will never be quite the same. The question now becomes, are we going to take advantage of this once in a lifetime chance to rethink our systems? So as Julia referenced, I want to thank all of our panelists, really distinguished set of panelists this afternoon for making time to be with our colleagues from across the country, hundreds of folks joining us this morning. Thanks for making time. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Jagers, who's going to get our conversation started. Dr. Jagers.
Thank you, Dr. Siddiqui. It's a pleasure to be here and to participate in this important panel. And to get us started, I'd like to first invite Dr. Kane to make a few opening remarks, hopefully to share a little bit about some of the data that have been revealing where some of the greatest needs for our young people are as a function of the pandemic. And some of the impacts on post-secondary enrollment and what you're seeing as it relates to potential strategies for addressing some of those concerns.
So thank you to the Hunt Institute for organizing this panel, and thanks Dr. Jagers for moderating this discussion. There are two groups of students I'm most worried about, that partially because they've been less of a focus of the headlines, and that is the first group is the graduates from 2020, high school graduates from 2020, who never showed up in colleges this fall. So there've been some stories about there was a 4% or 5% decline overall in college enrollment this fall. But that sort of hides a much larger decline among first-time college freshmen. So there was a 28% decline, 28% in 1 year decline in the number of African-American and Latino students enrolled as first-time freshmen in public two-year colleges. There was a 11% and a 15% decline in the proportion of in the number of African American and Latino students enrolled in public four-year colleges as freshmen this fall. And the reason why I'm worried about those kids in particular is the high schools aren't responsible for them anymore, nor are there any colleges who are responsible for them. So like there's nobody in a student services office at a community college that's worried about them. And there's nobody at a high school who's necessarily worried about them. And so I hope states use some of the funds they're getting to identify ways to reach out to that group. And it ought to be possible to identify them with National Student Clearinghouse data, people who graduated last spring who never showed up in a community college or a four-year college this fall. That's one group. The second group I'm worried about are the kids who've not been engaged in online classes this year. So last spring, we did an analysis for a school district that will remain anonymous, but you know, in the first month after COVID hit, there were some neighborhoods where 80% of kids didn't log in at all. And, you know, those were also the neighborhoods that had what was considered high absence rates before the pandemic, you know, say like 15% absence rates before the pandemic. But those differences in access were just dramatically multiplied. And so I sure hope that districts challenge their data and accountability teams to go through the data they have on which kids have been logging in and which kids haven't, and identify the kids who've been least engaged this school year and prioritize them for outreach this summer and for services, you know, next year, because there are an awful lot of kids. Not every kid was equally affected by this pandemic. Some kids were much more dramatically affected, and we've got to make sure that we help them catch up.
So thank you, Dr. Kane, for kind of setting the table for our fellow panelists. So you mentioned state data, and so I'd like to turn to Dr. Brumley to ask about the ways in which Louisiana might be utilizing state data to begin to surface some of the concerns, but then to address the needs of students in that state.
Yeah, thank you. Also, welcome to everyone on the call. I, like you, am hoping to learn from the panelists here today and my colleagues. So thank you. You know, one of the things we realized early on is that we needed to create a dashboard of information surrounding reopening and operations of our schools during the pandemic. And so this summer we stood up what we called just very simply, our reopening dashboard. And in that dashboard, of course, you know, prior to that, we as a state adopted minimum reopening guidelines to help mitigate against the spread of the virus in our schools. And so basically, if a school in our state, whether traditional public charter or non-public, was going to open, we had a base set of guidelines that they had to meet in order to do that. And then beyond that, we decided we needed to have a dashboard that would give state level data, but also system level data on a number of different indicators. So we have been able to track number and percentages of students in various modalities, whether that's been fully face-to-face, a hybrid model, or fully virtual. We've been able to track number of students with home confirmed internet connectivity. We've been able to track number of devices throughout our system, number of schools that are providing services in terms of high quality internet to kids, and just a suite of things we're able to track both at the state and district level. And so we have since made improvements to that, but it's been really helpful to us to be able to communicate to our public, the status of education within our state and where we stand. And so, as of today, I can tell you roughly 64% of our kids are in fully face-to-face instruction every day. And then the remaining is a balance between hybrid and fully virtual. We had asked every system in the state to go ahead and stand up a fully virtual model. We also know that only about 3 out of 4 of our kids can access internet in their homes right now. So that's something that has to be resolved. And frankly, with the stimulus proposal coming from the federal government, I just think that if there's not investment in broadband, it's a miss, because in many ways, like the interstate highway system, so many decades back, we could look at this as an opportunity that will help us with short term, but it'll also have long-term benefits. So, we set up that dashboard. It's been very helpful for us to be able to track information and then be able to make important policy and practice decisions.
Thank you, Dr. Brumman. I'd like to then now invite Dr. Contreras, a good colleague from Guilford County, to talk a little bit about data collection that is going on in your district and how that data is being utilized to help young people, help to prevent young people from slipping through the cracks.
Thank you so much, and good morning to all of my colleagues on the panel. It is wonderful to be here with you to talk to the public and once again have the opportunity to advocate for the millions of students that we serve in this nation. So I'd like to, before I talk about the kinds of data collection that we're engaged in, I'd like to just point out it's been very difficult for districts because for many years, we've been shortchanged so much in funding, and we've been trying to just hold on to teaching positions and the few programs we have that our data systems are not robust. And not all state systems are created equally. Louisiana has one of the best, and I use your information regularly. I visit your website regularly at the state level in Louisiana, because I don't feel that in North Carolina it's as robust, and so much is dictated by the legislature that some of the programs and systems we need, I feel, are not in place in terms of best-in-class systems. So it's been difficult to gather the information in a coherent way. And there hasn't been in every state the same level of public reporting to help us with our decision making and getting to the students who need the assistance the most. So for example, in North Carolina, superintendents are not allowed to see which students are on free and reduced lunch. Now, I'm new to North Carolina, so that's amazing to me because I know in other states we're allowed to see this data and to allocate resources appropriately. So if we had access to some key data points, it would make the work of the superintendency in supporting students much easier. So some of the things we are collecting are attendance data. We're collecting data on student sign-in, logins to the system, which is different than student engagement, as you all know, but we are monitoring that weekly. We're also monitoring the work of our support staff, the social workers, counselors, psychologists. How many home visits are they making? How often do they meet with students virtually? So we're keeping that data as well. We've also created risk reports for to try to ascertain which students are most at risk, so that the learning hubs that we've recently opened would be filled with students who need the most support. We're also working with our police chiefs to study data on juvenile crime rates. Are they increasing? And what we're noticing is the one that is increasing the most is burglary, home burglary, since schools closed. We're looking at our juvenile incarceration rates as well. How many juveniles are now in detention as opposed to pre-detention, pre-pandemic? So that, along with all of the academic measures that we use, or indicators, we're looking, of course, at grades, failure rates, we're looking at assessment data, formative, summative assessment data, to help determine how to best support students and to try to ensure that students do not fall through the cracks. But that is an enormously difficult task given the limitations of the systems, the data collection systems in school districts.
Thank you, Dr. Contreras. And the other panelists, Dr. Brumley and Dr. Kane, for your opening comments. I'd like to remind participants to submit questions via social media. You can tweet the Hunt Institute, and or you can submit your questions in the chat. So I'd like to re-engage with each of the panelists just to get a little bit more information based on your own expertise. And so first, Dr. Kane, as an economist, can you talk to us a little bit about impacts of non-academic supports on student outcomes, especially later in life? And what data are available to, or not, to help us better understand how our K-12 investments actually manifest later in life?
Well, you know, one of the things that we've learned in the last few years after linking, you know, student outcomes to earnings data is that, you know, student success on state assessments are strongly related to what students earn later. Their post-secondary success is very strongly related to the kinds of supports that they receive, but also is related to their earnings later. Like the payoff to college has gone up, and it's more important than ever. And so that's why I started off by talking about this lost group of the class of 2020. It's because right now there's no adult whose job it is to watch out for those kids. They left high school, they've not shown up in a college yet. And so unless the adults step up and say, you know, gosh, like we've got to figure out a way to throw a lifeline to these kids and make sure they know about, you know, how they would be applying to college. Remember, last year, they would have been getting help submitting college applications, or maybe even help submitting student financial aid applications through their high schools. Well, now that they're out there on their own, you know, how are we going to get those kinds of supports to them in applying for school in the future to get their careers back on track? And I'm just afraid without those supports, there'll be this big chunk. You know, think about that: 28% fewer kids started at community colleges this fall who were African American or Latino, at 15% fewer starting at public four-year colleges. Like that's a lot of kids, and they're sort of in a no man's land right now.
Thank you. Dr. Brumley, how are state data or district data being utilized to help us understand the experiences of students from different cultural backgrounds? We know that, diversity, the pandemic has had differential impact on different communities. Are there data that are helping us understand those differential impacts, and how can those data be leveraged?
Yeah. Well, a bit of context to start. In Louisiana, our educational system, we have just over 800,000 students in our state. And, of those students and educators, we have not only experienced, as all of you, a global health pandemic, but this year in Louisiana, we have experienced an especially difficult and live hurricane season, including the most powerful storm in terms of wind force to hit our state on record in Hurricane Laura, followed up by Delta on her heels. And so we have had to embrace a number of different challenges and work together to overcome those. And I have been, routinely inspired by our educators in the field doing the work that they are doing. One of the things that we have found in a very specific instance here is just around students who are no longer enrolled in school. And so we have seen, just over a 2% decline in enrollment this year across our state, which is really in line with the national average around 2%. But we are working now to build out an attendance initiative. And this initiative, we are going to work with partners throughout the state to help re-engage our students and our families this spring and through the summer. What we have found looking at the information is that of the 2% of students where we have a decrease, half of those are pre-K and kindergarten. So I've talked a number of times and made the athletic reference, but we feel that we're experiencing the red shirt kindergartner this year, and families are just keeping those kids at home. And in a state where only 40% of our kids are coming to school kindergarten ready, and that being more significant in an unfortunate way in our most impoverished communities, and then knowing that by the end of third grade, only about 46% of our kids are mastering ELA content and a little less in math. This is a real challenge for us. And so we are going to be acting fairly aggressively this spring and through the summer to re-engage as many families as we possibly can. And the other side of that, while I have the opportunity, is just better understanding the mental health needs of our kids and our employees. For instance, one of the things that we were able to do is we conducted over 40 focus groups around what are the successes and challenges that we've experienced in educating through a pandemic. And really, we were able to come up with some patterns here. And one of those patterns across the board was mental health of kids and students. And so we are working right now on a number of different endeavors on this. One of these is training hundreds of educators through a partnership with a university in order to help educators and leaders better understand things like empathy, listening, goal setting, understanding emotions, and decision making, and then how then can they better equip students in those areas too. So, we have attendance issues, truancy issues, but we also have tremendous mental health issues with individuals once they're actually back in the buildings or engaging in a hybrid or virtual format. So we have a lot to work through, but we feel that, like the rest of you, we are doing all that we can with the information that we have and the resources we have to educate safely through this pandemic.
Thank you. Dr. Contreras, maybe we can extend on that theme. We realize that young people, children from under-resourced communities often rely on schools to provide supports. Can you talk a little bit about how your district is addressing some of the nutritional needs, the other issues around the well-being of young people and families that has surfaced as a function of the pandemic, and certainly pre-existed prior to the pandemic, but have been exacerbated by this health crisis.
Yes, absolutely. I want to begin by just saying that what Dr. Kane has shared is extraordinarily important, in that there are students who are being impacted very differently than others. I'm sorry, I hear like construction outside of me, so I'm sorry if you're picking up on the construction noise. And we have a long history in this district of making attempts to understand the racial history of the nation, the state, and our district to help us with decision making. And that's how we use data. We always use a racial equity lens in reviewing the data. So in looking at the data, we understand that students need more than academic support. So we immediately began supporting families by making sure food was delivered. They could pick up food. We could deliver food via the buses. We had hubs in churches and other community centers. We worked with childcare centers. We also began advocating strongly for more broadband connection at the local level, at the state level, and at the federal level. We provided supports for students. We looked closely at proficiency rates, past proficiency rates, students who are considered exceptional children, English language learners, those who have a propensity to be absent more. And we created, as I said, these at-risk reports so that we could provide support in a laser-like way, really get down to the individual student. And we've been doing that. We've been making sure that we improve the education for our incarcerated students who are more at risk than any other students. We also started training our staff, our teachers, and we're training all 10,000 on sexual assault and what to look for, because many of our students are homeless. And we knew that we couldn't get into the shelters initially. So we trained teachers on things like mandatory reporting, Title IX, challenging myths about Black girls and maturity, trauma-informed and healing-centered responses to sexual assault, so that they would be looking for that as well, and also looking for any signs of abuse and neglect. So a lot of work has been done based on the data, but had we not had that training all along, or had that commitment to making certain that we look at all data with a race equity lens, I don't think all students would be receiving what they need. And certainly we are missing students. This is imperfect, but I think we're doing better than many because of the lens that we bring. I think the other thing that is important is, if we know these gaps exist, for example, that no one is looking at who graduated from high school but didn't enroll in a community college, or college is not in an apprenticeship program, then we should be thinking differently about how we use CARES funding. Instead of just using that CARES Act funding to keep all of our employees, we have a short window of opportunity to think about how to reimagine education and use funding in a way that can really support students, so that we don't exacerbate these wealth gaps that have persisted from generation to generation.
Thank you. Dr. Kane, I'd like to invite you to pick up on that thread, given what it is we know, or what we're learning about the life circumstances of our young people, communities, et cetera. What is it we should be doing differently? How do we begin to think about kind of a reimagined educational experience for kids from diverse backgrounds?
So here are three very concrete things that are I don't know how imaginative they are, but I do think they would make a difference, for kids. Number one, there's an organization called the National Student Clearinghouse. Many of you will be familiar with it, but maybe not everybody. And we ought to be able to identify, I guess it would be most efficient to do it at the state level, everybody who graduated from the spring of 2020 class who never showed up in a college or a college this past fall, and provide them, reach out and use the last contact information we have for them, and reach out to them and say, look, if you need help applying for college or applying for financial aid, here's some resources. That's one very concrete thing. A second very concrete thing is the class of 2021 is likely to be in very similar circumstances. Their whole college application process and all of that has all been disrupted this spring. So we know a lot of them are going to be in the same position this time next year. So let's right now collect information from them so that we can track them down next winter with help and other links and other resources if we need it. So it's too late for the class of 2020 to make sure we get all potential information, but it's not too late for the class of 2021 to catch that. A third very concrete thing would be to say to the data people, look, we want to report not just of what kids didn't log in this week, but let's get a report of the number of logins or over the course of this whole school year so far. Let's get a cumulative count per kid, and let's use that list and ideally identify the kids who were enrolled in our school systems last year that didn't seem to re-enroll this past fall, but who we don't have a record of, having enrolled, someplace else. Again, the state might be in the best position to do this, and put together those two lists: the kids who didn't re-enroll this fall, and the kids who missed the most number of days and lessons this year. And let's just start planning now for reaching out to those kids this summer and fall. Those aren't rethinking the whole thing, but those are at least three very concrete things school districts could be doing.
Yes. Well, yeah. So thank you. It is, it's daunting to try to fully imagine something new and different. So we appreciate your list of three. It's a great start. So you, Dr. King, you mentioned the prospect of state level data. Dr. Brumley, can you talk a little bit about family support in the context of virtual placements? Across the comments by all of the panelists, this issue of access has come up. Are there supports, guidance, et cetera, that states can provide to assist families in this virtual learning environment?
Yeah, I mean, this is, as a former school leader and system leader, family engagement is always, or can always be difficult and a struggle, and there really isn't a silver, bullet to accomplishing this. It's hard work, and no one really has, the absolute answer to making this perfect, but we all continue to strive for that. A couple of things for us, in March of the year, all of our schools across the state, doors were closed. And at that point, various systems went to, a number of different forms of offering some type of instruction. And so we as a state and us as a country over a period of, 2, 3, 4 months tried to pivot from face-to-face instruction, which is what we have always done for thousands of years with teachers in front of a student, to virtual instruction. And there's no doubt in my mind that our delivery of virtual instruction is so much better today, leaps and bounds better than say in March or April or May, without question. But one of the things that we knew would also be important is to support families. And so we have a number of, family endeavors, such as with our virtual instruction, we put out a family companion guide. So we put out best practices in virtual instruction to all of our systems and schools, but we also put out a family companion guide on what families should expect from virtual instruction, which was well received by so many of our families. Another thing that was really important for us, we asked every system in the state to develop a reopening and operational plan for how they would educate in the pandemic. And as a part of that, we asked that they include a communication strategy that involved family engagement. And so we have actually seen some of the best family engagement that we have ever seen as a result of this. And again, there's not one single way to engage. There are multiple ways, and consumers receive information in different ways. And so we are just trying our best to meet those needs across the state. But even in our educational priority plan that we just released, that will outline our work for the next 2, 3, 4 years, one of our belief statements is we believe that families are our partners. And you can't just say that and then not engage families. And so we're trying to come through with effective ways to do that.
Thank you. Dr. Contreras, I see you nodding around the family engagement piece and wanted to invite you to comment, if you care to, about that particular issue. I know that that's central to Guilford County.
Absolutely. I would concur with my colleague that we've seen greater family engagement since the pandemic for 2 reasons. One, at the beginning of the school year, we did something that we were forced to do because we were trying to prepare for a virtual reopening, but also because it's something that we always wanted to do in education. We finally had the opportunity to have parents and teachers meet together over a 3-week period and to do the parent-teacher conferences before school started, just to prepare for the school year, to share strengths, challenges. And that's something we always said we wish we had more time at the beginning of the year to work with parents before a problem arises. And we had this opportunity because of the flexibilities afforded by the State Department of Education and the state legislature, the General Assembly, with the calendar, so that we could just take this time while we pre-recorded all lessons for all students using our most highly effective teachers. We pre-recorded lessons for 3 weeks, and during those 3 weeks, the other teachers all met with our parents. The second thing we're seeing is that parents are just seeing what happens in the classroom upfront and personal in a way that they've not experienced before. So some of what we're seeing is a result of the pandemic and virtual learning, but some of it, if you walked in a classroom, you would see the same thing: the worksheets, the videos, the PowerPoints over and over again, and not the sort of authentic teaching, highly engaging teaching that we would expect. And so parents are seeing that, and certainly I've answered more questions and had to respond to more concerns about what is being taught, how it's being taught, than I have in my entire 30-year experience as an educator.
Fantastic. So one of our attendees, or a couple of our attendees, have questions about the prospect of full reopening. And I'd like to get Dr. Contreras or Dr. Brumley maybe to speak a little bit to the prospect of full reopening, especially in the context of new variants of COVID-19. Maybe Dr. Brumley first, and then Dr. Contreras.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we have routinely shared is access to medical experts in our state. And so we have developed some great partnerships with some of the brightest educational minds and talents in our state. And we have tried to make sure that our systems across the state in a structured way have had access to them. And so they continue to share with us and was recently affirmed by the CDC that schools can be safe places with the proper mitigation efforts in place and with the appropriate levels of community spread. And so we, as I mentioned earlier, we put in place some really strong mitigation efforts at the beginning of the year around face coverings for students and employees, around social distances, group sizes, transportation size, sanitation efforts, temperature checks, all of these different things, like many of you across the country have also worked to do. But I really think a few things matter here. One is quarantining requirements. So many of the times where we have had to take a school down, it has not been because of an outbreak of the virus. In fact, our schools have not been a center of outbreak of the virus, but it's been because we haven't been able to maintain a staff or a cafeteria staff or transportation staff or office staff because of quarantining rules. So our Department of Health is exploring that. The other thing that I really just believe is going to be the game changer is access to the vaccine for employees. You know, we have advocated our state government to prioritize not just teachers, but support staff as well. And in addition to that, advocating for priority access to the vaccine for individuals in early childcare, birth to 4 facilities throughout the state. And so for me, I think that once we can have comprehensive access to the vaccine for employees, you know, that will be the game changer in terms of having some degree of normalcy in returning to fully face-to-face instruction.
Thank you. Dr. Contreras, your views?
Yeah, I would agree with all of those things. Not much to add here. We too work with the public health officials at the state and local level and with the ABC Duke Collaborative, which has been just tremendously helpful for superintendents and school districts. But we are struggling with reopening because of quarantine rules. And it's not so much reopening, it's remaining open, having enough staff to staff our school, but not just the school, the food services, school nutrition staff are quarantined often, bus drivers. So we have about 540 bus drivers when we are fully staffed. But with the number on leave and the number quarantined on any given day and just general vacancies that you have in transportation, we're down to fewer than 400, which is causing a lot of difficulties with the reopening plan. So I know many are so dependent on us to get these schools reopened safely as soon as possible. But the logistics of doing so when there's so much fear out there is difficult, and with the quarantine rules. I would add that the vaccinations of teachers need to be prioritized in every single state. I think the fear our staff has, and when I say teachers, I mean all of our school staff, it's been difficult to overcome that barrier, for superintendents to overcome the fear factor that our staffs are experiencing. And then along with the vaccinations, just a way to fund a widespread testing program for COVID in schools would make staff feel a lot more confident about returning to the workplace.
Thank you. Dr. Kane, I want to bring you back in, but I want to pivot. There are some questions. In your opening comments, you spoke about post-secondary education. And there are questions around information available on students who enter trade schools and or apprenticeships, so non-college track students and their participation or lack of participation in those educational opportunities. And we might also include community colleges and what is being done there as well.
So I was speaking shorthand before. I was talking mostly about public four-year and public two-year colleges, but you're right. There are lots of other post-secondary options that might be, a better match for some students. Now, some of those students will qualify for federal post-secondary, grants and loans, to attend. But there may be others that don't qualify for federal post-secondary student financial aid. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that in the last round of stimulus funding that was passed back in December, governors received about $5 billion in aid. School districts received about like $54 billion in aid, but governors also received a pot of money that was intended to be flexible, that governors could use to help fill in the gaps for things that were not being covered before. And it could be that the governors could be using some of those dollars if there are other post-secondary training options for students that don't qualify for federal financial aid. The governors might be able to use those dollars to help preserve opportunities for students.
Thank you. So I'd like to ask each of you just quickly to comment on the role of outside partners in this work. The prospect of community-based organizations, philanthropy, and how they might, how those stakeholders might be helpful. We've talked a lot about educational institutions, K-12, post-secondary, some about families, but there are other stakeholders who might also be helpful as we navigate this pandemic and try to envision alternative educational opportunities for our young people. So can you speak a little bit to partners that you think are either proximal to you or distal who might be helpful? Let me help. So let's start with Dr. Contreras and then go to Dr. Bromley and Dr. King.
Thank you. I think that's a great question. We've been partnering with many of our non-for-profit organizations and the faith-based community, along with our university partners. And in fact, I don't think we'd be able to open in the way currently we have pre-K 5 in school every day of the week, not on a hybrid type schedule, and we are about to reopen 6th through 12th grade. And I think without the support of organizations like Ready Ready or the faith community that is assisting with childcare, the YMCA, YWCA, Boys and Girls Club, all of these organizations that are working to provide the additional supports to families that we have traditionally provided at the school site, but now cannot because we have to close schools at the end of the day, engage in deep cleaning of buildings. It has been very helpful to work with our partners, but also to improve upon the relationship for the future. And I saw someone ask in one of the questions about, or made the comment that we really have to use this opportunity to rethink schools and our partnerships in everything we do. And that includes how we work with, how school districts work effectively with others to provide the types of support that students and their families need to be successful. So I think the pandemic has provided us some opportunities to improve upon those relationships. And I tell you, every aspect of the Guilford County community has come through for the school district. I think with philanthropy, I think there has to be more of a push to ask school districts what we actually need that aligns with the priorities of those philanthropies. But it would be helpful to just ask us, how can we support you better? What would be a way to use resources effectively to support students, rather than saying, we want you to do X, Y, Z, and we have funding, and asking us to change all of our plans for how we support students and their families.
Do you think, though, do you think that there are ways to leverage data to help philanthropy and other community-based organizations to understand needs and resources as well?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, what we've done each time that we've presented to our community-based partners or had conversations is present them with the key data points. One we're going to present tonight is the first semester end of course test results and how they compare to previous years, to make the case that we need more learning hubs for all students throughout the community. We need more support for the tutoring initiatives. We're trying to provide a tutor for every student that needs that, and we have allocated funding for that. But certainly we need more funds to make sure that we can mitigate the deep learning loss that we've experienced. But data is key for the public to understand what the needs are and to compel them to support us in the ways that we need to be supported.
Thank you. Dr. Brumley, same question.
Yeah, I am an educator, so I can say this about myself. I mean, I think that too often we are territorial and we need to stop. Like under current levels of educational funding, we will never be able to afford everything that we need to do. And we have real challenges such as generational poverty, literacy rates that are not where they need to be. We have mental health challenges. We have an opioid epidemic, one could argue. And so we have to tap into every resource that is available to us in order to do this work. And the work is too large, the work is too broad for us to isolate or insulate and do it alone. We need partners. We only have roughly 40 hours a week that we are with kids, if you consider that basic 8 hours a day. There are 128 hours when kids are in the communities. And so we have to work together with our hours, with the community hours, so that we're all aligned and trying to do the same thing with, finite resource. And so anything that we can do to break down those barriers and engage partners, whether they're, as mentioned earlier, faith-based, nonprofit, or philanthropy, we need to be doing those things.
Thank you. And Dr. King.
Yes. So one thing to keep in mind is that teachers are worn out at this point in the year. Like every school district that I've, talked to, like people are still focused on just trying to get through this year and have not had time to start to plan for what to do this summer and the fall to help kids catch up. And so And so it's going to require energy and engagement from folks outside the schools to at least start the process this summer. And a number of school districts are starting to talk about like a tutoring type initiatives for helping the kids I've been talking about who've been least engaged this year, help them catch up. And my guess is that there'll be a lot of that staffing will come from folks who were not regular classroom teachers this year. That many of those folks are looking forward to the summer and trying to recover. So if we could find ways that maybe folks who have experience working with kids, retired teachers, others who could potentially hook up with one of these tutoring organizations to help this summer, I think that would benefit us all.
So thank you. I'd like to thank the panelists very much for their thorough and thoughtful responses, and also thank our attendees, and turn it back over to my colleague, Julia Cunningham.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jagers, and thank you, like you said, to all of our panelists. In addition to the conversation being great, I think we may have broken our record of questions submitted into the chat, and also broken our record of participation from panelists in the chat. So thanks to everyone who was involved in that. And sorry if we didn't get to one of your questions. I'm gonna talk to our panelists afterwards and see if there's any way that we can maybe get a little bit of follow-up of some of those. So thank you so much again. Just a couple quick logistical things, announcements before we get going. As many of you probably know, we have a really large offering of webinars through the Hunt Institute that we would love for you to attend. Our next homeroom webinar will be on March 9th, if I can get to it. There we go. And we'll be talking about entrepreneurship in education. And we will have Hassan from 4.0 Schools, Superintendent Truitt from here in North Carolina, and Joel Vargas from JFF. So that's going to be another really great panel, and I hope that you will all be able to join us. Another quick note, on Thursday of this week, we have our Governing Principles webinar series, and they'll be talking about equity-centered assessment, which I think will tie in really nicely to the conversation that we had today. And so we will have Dr. Monique Chisholm from AIR, Lieutenant Governor Crouch from Indiana, Laura Jimenez from Center for American Progress, and Lieutenant Governor Morales from New Mexico. I think one of my colleagues should be sending the link to register for that webinar in the chat. So please feel free to click on it and go ahead and register for Thursday's webinar. I won't go through all of these, but here are just some of our other upcoming webinars that we would love to draw your attention to. And if you would like to learn more about them, you can visit the Hunt Institute webinar landing page, which has registration links and info about all of our upcoming webinars over the next month or so. And that's updated regularly. My last note, we will be, when you exit out of today's webinar, there will be just a quick survey that you're redirected to if you have a second for our own internal purposes to just answer a couple quick questions. That would be wonderful. But otherwise, thank you again to all of our panelists. Thank you to all of you for being here. And I hope you have a great rest of your week. Bye, everyone.